For those that don't know, my name is Wade Cook, and have had the privilege of being a part of this fellowship for the last 30 some years. And was a minister here, stepped out, I work for a nonprofit now, but I'm one of the elders as well. And more present to this tonight, I'm a licensed counselor. And as such, it's one of the things that we talk about a lot in counseling, that the holiday seasons typically bring up a grief or can be a challenge, particularly when all of society is joyful and happy, and we're expected to embrace all that joy, and sometimes there's what's the matter with you, either looks or questions. And that gave rise to tonight, and that's what, it was actually Hans's idea, that let's have a time where we can create community and just give voice to the fact that although there is a piece of us that is happy about Jesus coming back and Jesus coming for the first time and what that means, there's also a significant and very traumatic and challenging loss that I'm trying to negotiate. How do I navigate and hold those two things in dynamic tension? So tonight, my hope is not that you'll leave going, oh, it's all fixed, thank you, it's all perfect. That's not going to happen. But two things I do want to happen. The first is that you can look around and recognize that you're in community. You're not alone, and you're not going through this alone. God has given us the gift of each other. So that's the first thing, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. The second is that hopefully there will be a tool or two that will allow you to cope, to deal with the very challenging, disorienting feelings of grief, of loss. And so we're going to start with a video, and then the video is actually going to set up some thoughts. We'll pray, and then I'll communicate what we're doing after that. So video, if you will, Maestro. That's right. It's good to know that technology always works perfectly in this way.
An angel came to see Mary. She was doing laundry, and then the angel just appeared and she was really scared. So Gabriel was like, Mary, you're gonna have, I can't say it good. Mary, you're gonna have a baby. You're gonna have a baby, and you will call him Jesus. And then Mary was like, I'm not gonna have a baby yet. I'm only a teenager, I'm not married. Then the angel Gabriel told Joseph that Mary is not lying. You are having a new baby. And so they met up. They went to Bethlehem, which was Joseph's old town.
They ride a donkey.
I don't know.
A camel.
Oh yeah, a camel.
She said, this donkey's fast. They tried to go to a hotel and
They asked the keeper for a place to stay. The keeper said,
we have no rooms. Literally, no rooms.
So Mary and Joseph walked away sadly, but then he said,
the only place here in Bethlehem that you can stay is a stable. And then he just pointed the way and they followed. When the shepherds were taking care of the sheep,
then they saw angels.
the angel said, a new baby is getting born, who is King of the Jews.
The angel were singing. Glorious.
And then the shepherd said, I think we should go there and meet him. The second, I think, said, yeah, I agree with you. And the other said, yeah, me too. They had to walk through a bunch of grass and bushes, maybe have to camp out a night. And then the wise men heard about it.
And then a star appeared.
we should probably follow that star. It's pointing down to the barn.
So maybe we should follow it. Maybe. So the wise men went to Jesus.
They gave them gifts.
A stuffed animal, like a hippo one, that I have at home.
Some diapers, and some wipes, and some milk, some shoes, some Jordans.
Gold ring and Latimer.
And I don't know how I would survive in that barn. Too stinky, too crowded, and ugh.
I think He probably pooped because the room was very smelly. Thank you for coming.
He's adorable.
He's gonna be our best friend.
I love you, and you the best baby I ever seen. There, I said it.
The new baby is gonna change the world.
Now, I really, really love that little video, and it's super cute, and it just gives warm feelings over the video. But for tonight, it does embody what I think is our challenge, is that, one, that is not nearly how it happened. That the story of Jesus coming is filled with much more pain and disorientation and distance and difficulty and obstacle and racism, and there's a lot more to the real story. And the sanitized version is really cute. I'm not down on the video at all, but sometimes we can feel that in our grief in the holiday season, is that all of that glitter and glitz it's not real. What I'm dealing with is real. And how do you navigate those two things? And that is what we're here to do tonight. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. In verse 3, it says, if you have your scriptures, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the Lord of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. For just as the sufferings of Christ flow over into our lives, so also through Christ our comfort overflows. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Now, Paul is talking about the difficulties of his ministry. But what he does speak to in an oblique term are two things that I think are present in grief and in challenge. The first is community. That there is an importance of doing life together. God could have made us isolated beings, but he wove into us relationship, the need for a relationship, the desire for a relationship. That's in part what many of us are grieving. The thing you love, that relationship is now altered in some way. So there is a need for community still. Secondly, in our grief process, there are comforts, there are things that we can learn and share that God calls us to share. That our loss can be a tool of which we minister and actually create relationship and aid relationship. And that's why we're doing this together. Why a Blue Christmas, I could have sent out an email and just said, hey, read these things and think about them, but that's not nearly as important as coming together. To share our loss, to share some victory, to share some distance, to even just share, to be present, to know that we're not alone. And that's what tonight, I hope, again, is for. I think I may have said it before, but my goal is that you'll have two things. One, a sense of community and look around to recognize you're not alone. Two, something I hope will be said or shared that may be a tool or an aid, a handlebar as you're navigating your particular loss or losses. So I really appreciate you being here. You are not just the audience, you are also the program. And that's what I'm most excited about. A couple of tips before we pray, and then we're going to watch another video. The first is that when we're talking about grieving, it's funny how there can be a hierarchy of grief. You know, if I've lost a parent, you're at the very top. If I've just lost a job, sometimes that can be poo-pooed, or I've lost health, or lost an opportunity. All of them are losses. I'm not trying to equate the feeling as the same, but the feelings are different. Maybe you've lost a pet. That's a grief, nonetheless. And sometimes we can feel, although most don't say, condescended to. Like, oh, you just lost what, fill in the blank here. That's not nearly as bad, or you shouldn't feel bad, or sometimes maybe even we'll listen to those voices of Satan by saying, don't even bring those up. That, that'll just irritate other people. So I want to dispel any of those to real. If you have loss, and we will all encounter losses of a variety of kind, your loss is your loss. It's significant. It's real. It needs to be ministered to and talked about. So there isn't a greater or worse loss. There's your loss. And that's important and significant. And again, you are the program and you bring that to us. And I'm really appreciative of what we're going to spend some time sharing. But I wanted to say, first of all, that all grief is important and significant. Secondly, why is a question that many of us will ask, and why is not a typically good question that moves anyone forward. We have to think in terms of what. What do I do from here? Whom should I talk to? Who is looking out for me? What am I learning, or what am I processing in this? How am I coping? Those are good questions to ask. If you are asking why did God allow such and such? Why did such and such happen? Those questions are almost never answered and can just lead us into kind of a round and round and round feeling of why. When I was in high school, my best friend was electrocuted. And totally a stupid, senseless thing. If you knew Steve, then you'd understand. But I remember the day that it was actually my mother who told me. And I was doing work at a lady's house. She called and said, "You come home." And I could tell in her voice there was something different. It wasn't just, "Hey, I need to talk to you." It was, "You come home immediately." So when I walked in, she was crying. And I said, what happened? She said, Steve's died. And I literally could not process those words. Steve died. And I think I even laughed, like, huh, what? And she said, he's been electrocuted. And she just started crying. She was crying. And I still remember spinning on those words, but it's like I couldn't drink them in, or I couldn't digest it, I couldn't get it. And so I went immediately down to his parents' house where Mr. and Mrs. Jackson were. And when I walked in, Mrs. Jackson grabbed me and she held me, and it was really hard. Like, her son is gone, and now, like, I was her replacement son, kind of. You read all these things into it. And Mr. Jackson, to my point, was just walking in this circle, round and round and round, and he kept saying, why? And to no one in particular, with no help, but just why. He was just walking in a circle. He was just stuck. And that's the memory to me of recognizing what I suggest tonight, that why is just going to keep you walking in a circle. But what? What can I do? How can I move from here? An important question, again, that I want you to be thinking about as we go through is, who's watching out for me? Who is taking care of me, giving me space to talk? Who's asking? You should have someone. And again, no matter what level of grief, who's looking out for you? So that's tip number 2. And then tip number 3, and we'll talk later, be patient with yourself and others. There is no right way to grieve, but there are wrong ways. And some of the obvious, drug, alcohol, escapism, we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. But isolating is also one of a wrong way. If there's thoughts of, I'm just going to be strong, or I need to be strong for somebody, or I don't want to bring them down, or I don't want to be the buzzkill at whatever, man, fight those thoughts. The one advice I hope is grieve out loud, meaning talk about it. Find those things that do bring peace and do them. Talk about them. But don't isolate. So those are the 3 things that I want to suggest as we get started. Does that make sense? Questions, comments before? We're going to watch a video, then have a little thought, and then we're going to break up and have an exercise. So questions? Any? Sure. Have to remember what I wrote down. There is no hierarchy of grief. Your grief is your grief, and there's no, better or worse or stronger or more serious or less serious. Your grief, your loss is yours. And there's all kinds of things that we lose. Again, the death of a parent, the death of a sibling, the loss of an opportunity, loss of health. Those things have marked and consistent impacts on us. So your grief is your grief. There's no hierarchy, and no one here is like, what are you doing here? kind of thought. Does that make sense? Good, good. Why don't we start with or continue, I should say, with a prayer. And I was just going to throw my good friend Dave under the bus to see if he could pray for us, set of context, and then we'll get underway or continue. We're going to watch another video, and then that's going to set up a couple of thoughts that I'll have.
Ordinary people, elderly people who live alone, sometimes go for days without talking to anyone. Everyone knows that you had a loss, that someone's died. No one is aware of loneliness. I've just turned 85, and I've been a journalist, or was a journalist until recently, for 63 years. Before that, I was a police officer. Before that, I was in the RAF regiment in Germany. Before that, I was a young schoolboy who left school at 14 in Nottingham.
Well, that's fair, isn't
That's after a heavy lunch.
That's me usually.
Experience with loneliness, yes, it's well, it started as a very personal thing, of course, when my wife, Christine, passed away 3 years ago. Very traumatic circumstances. She was an English girl, but we met by happy accident. It's love at first sight. We were never apart. We were married within months and were together for 44 years. She was a financial benefits officer for councils. Then when she retired, she became a charity worker.
That's lovely.
That was it. Oh, that's the wedding day for us.
Oh,
Consequently, I was in shock virtually for almost a year. I wasn't aware then of loneliness. At that point, I was in shock. I was in physical shock for it. On the New Year's Day the following year, I had this black dog of a day on New Year's Day, and I didn't want to go on any further. I didn't want to be here. It becomes just painful. It's a physical pain, it's a hurt. It's almost like a wound. There's no self-cure for it. But suddenly it was almost as though I had a message from Christine. She said, you can't do this to yourself. You're hurting yourself. I'm in a better place. Don't think about me. Don't worry about me. That was a turning point, actually. That was what we come to know in bereavement as acceptance. When you accept the fact that your loved one has gone and won't be coming back. Until that point, it's denial. You're denying death. And that's when loneliness became evident. I became aware that, finally I became aware that I was alone. Till then I wasn't. That's my firstborn. Dominic is now 37.
yeah.
There they are. And that's Jonathan,
that's
the young
lovely.
one.
So, how many years apart is it? Two?
Just 2
Yeah.
years, yes. See, I think I make the point here, there's various levels of loneliness. That is extreme. Everyone knows that you had a loss, that someone's died. No one is aware of loneliness. I would delight in asking a very elderly lady, tell me about your wedding day. Something like that. And all the other ladies would perk up. Oh, and suddenly you have a long conversation about their various wedding days, the happy events of their lives. Then the brain ticks in again, because after a while it stultifies. Something like this conversation would make someone respond, because they'd be thinking about it, you see, hopefully.
Great outfit there.
That dates me. That's my golfing outfit too.
Love it.
Wouldn't happen today.
No.
When I finally regained some sort of composure, I wrote a book about her. I didn't anticipate the therapy it would bring to me. And when I'd finished the book, my son Jonathan said, don't stop now. Find something else to do. You must find another project, do something else. And by chance, I read about the campaign to end loneliness, but it was another project for me, you see. Great therapy. It's more than great therapy, it has been life-affirming for me. I know that Christine will be delighted.
That video is called Dealing with Loneliness and Grief at Christmas. And, it's just the guy sharing his story. But there's some very profound and important elements about that I wanted to talk to. Luke chapter 2 is where we're going to eventually go. But here are a couple of the thoughts. The first is that grief is a journey. You are moving towards this place of a new normal. And that's what we may call in therapeutic terms acceptance. Acceptance does not equal, oh, okay, I totally get it. Or, I feel great about that. It's not. It's recognizing and finding your place in this new normal that does not have that person or thing or place present as it was before. There is a new normal. Your grief journey towards it may take longer or shorter, but it is a journey. You're moving towards something. So don't feel like I'm just, stuck. You are moving towards something. How do you move towards something? Telling your story. Everyone has a great story. There's a reason why you're feeling the loss, because that loss represents a goodness, a kindness, a strength, a source of joy in your life. That's important. That's a great story. I haven't seen it around in a long time, but there was a funeral home here in Denver that had a marketing campaign for a while, and they would show an old picture, kind of a brown edged picture of a person, and they would say facts about the person, like they were the taught 2,038 children. They were the first to graduate from high school in their class. They fought in World War II, or there were whatever these little facts. And the tagline was "A life well lived." We celebrate a life well lived, and I've thought that is so true. Everyone has a story. You are a story. You are creating a story for somebody. You are having an impact. Everyone has a story. Part of the grief process of moving forward is sharing your story. And we're going to do that a little bit tonight. A third thing to recognize is that grief is hard. I wish there was some manual that just said, okay, do this, and then do that, and then drink this, and then, you feel better. It's hard. It feels capricious. Some days you have a good day, and you don't even think about it. Some days it's like every moment just feels like walking through mud. And you still have to live life. You still have to pay bills. You hopefully are living indoors. You're bathing regularly. You still have stuff to do. But and it's made more difficult, just your regular living, with this unpredictable flow of feelings. That is hard. So again, as I said earlier, just be patient with yourself and patient with others, because it's very few of us, and I include myself in this, don't know many times what to say. And a lot of times there's nothing to say, just being present. But you will probably hear, if you haven't, someone very well-meaning say something very dumb. If you've lost a child, well, you can have another one. Is that helping? I'm not sure. Where did that come from? Or, you'll just get over it. Or you can insert your own dumb comment here. Those dumb comments are, although well-meaning, they can be hurtful. Be patient with them too. Luke chapter 2. As I said, the story of the Christmas story is nothing like the cute video that we started with. I love those cute videos, but the actual Christmas story was, if you would go back and interview Mary, and Luke did, this is where we think, historians think that Luke, who was not an eyewitness to Jesus or the resurrection, wrote a biography of Jesus and a biography of the early church. And so Luke and Acts were actually one book initially. And the highlight of the book, that which happened in the very middle of the two books, is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Luke starts with a clarity of how Jesus got to the resurrection and what that meant for the church. That's what the book of Luke and Acts are together. But to do so, he, as a physician, also was a pretty learned, it would seem, academician, and he did sort of scholarly research to write this book. One of was to sit down, we think, with Mary and say, tell me your story. And think about even the loss that Mary experienced. It's a whole nother lesson. But for those of you with children, can you imagine making your child your Lord? Just the emotional and the spiritual leap that takes. Can you imagine watching your child be brutalized and murdered? That's traumatic. To see your son come back, but in glorified form, that's amazing, but he does leave 40 days later. So he's still gone from your life. And the days and the years and the weeks and the months of what she must have experienced in her own grief. I imagine that she heard some pretty dumb things like, why are you sad? You got to give birth to the Christ. I mean, he's alive. He's in heaven, but come on, buck up. What must that have felt like to her? Like, yeah, amen. But, geez, there's still a grief. How did she handle that? The scriptures don't give us too much detail. But they do say a little something here in the first part of Luke, which I wanted to highlight for us. Actually, back in verse 1 of chapter 1, verse 39. Even further back. I meant to go. Luke chapter 1, verse 26. I was in the totally wrong way. Luke chapter 1, verse 26. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. Now that seems like a great start to a conversation. You know, if you had an angel come to you, most people who had an angel, Mary included, were freaked out. But to say, you're doing fantastic, you who are highly favored, we talk about you in heaven. Greetings. That's a good start sometimes. But for Mary, I don't know what it was like for Mary. These are some of the questions I'd like to ask. But that seems like a good start. Mary, however, was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. No matter how good the news, sometimes you look at it through a lens of suspicion or insecurity or distrust. And Mary, it would seem, may have had, I'm not trying to get down on Mary, I'm saying sometimes the things up front, the way they appear, aren't actually as they appear. Your situation probably does not have a why they can answer, but there is a good reason. Mary wondered, why are you, I don't know if she was even thinking, why are you buttering me up? Hey, best friend, how are you? You're awesome. Hey, can I ask you something? You know, we all go, whoa, hey, whoa. Used car salesman, not interested. I don't know what was in Mary's heart, but the greeting did not match the way she saw herself. Mary had a lot more strength than she thought she would have. You have a lot more strength than you think you do. You can do this. And the greeting, although it came from an angel, didn't match internally what she thought of herself. And so I wanted to communicate, first of all, you do have more strength than you think. God has made you remarkably well. you have, as a human being, enormous capacity for love, for resilience, for perseverance. You are made really, really well by God. So when I say you have the strength for this, you probably do not match. You don't feel like you do. And that's not meant to go, okay, good, I can handle this. It just means those overwhelmed feelings are just feelings. You will be able to make it through. Mary was greatly troubled, but the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him a throne to his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." That is huge. For 1,500 years, the Jews have been waiting for the Messiah. And every Jewish boy and girl learned from an early age exactly who they were waiting for, who God was prepared. And can you imagine, ladies, hearing, you're going to give birth to him? That's a lot to get your mind around. And you don't have, I think, even to get your mind around it, to still trust God. Does that make sense? That this is a huge thing. Again, I'm really looking forward to Mary, to talking to her. I hope I make it to heaven to interview her, like, what were you thinking? And what was really going through your mind when you heard, you're going to give birth to the reconciliation of all mankind? I wonder if she's like, wow, I had a billion questions. But you don't have to totally understand to trust, is my point. You don't have to, it doesn't have to all make sense for it still to be God's will and direction, and that it's going to work out. She asked, how can, let me just ask the obvious. I'm a teenager. I've never slept with anybody. I'm a virgin. So pregnancy, there's biological rules, and I know enough to know that. Well, the Holy Spirit is going to come upon you and you'll be pregnant. Okay, now, if I had said that, how old are you guys? 16. Teenage girls. I won't ask about your history, but I'm just going to say, you are now going to be pregnant. For my exercise, you go, yes, thank you, that'd be fantastic. In real life, that brings up a whole host of problems. How am I going to explain that to anybody? How am I taking, what? That is a terrible plan, is maybe what I would be thinking. Do you know how responsible I am? Do you know how I can't even clean my room and you want me to give birth to the Messiah? What? But I am amazed. And I believe that's what's going through her head. It wasn't like she was like, oh, excellent plan. I get it. Good idea. I'm in. But she does make the leap of trust that even though I don't get it, I'm in. Even though that makes no sense, and I have a billion questions, and it's not like, okay, I get it, it'll be fine. My life will be altered forever because of this. I'll be changed forever. But she does make the leap. And this is what I'm asking you to consider too. You might not understand. There may never be a why answer, but the leap of trust is one important step in your journey, of trusting that God really is in control. He knows what he's doing. This thing has happened, and you don't have to get your mind around it to still say, I trust you. And there's a strength in that, and a peace in that I trust you got it. Mary did amazing things, even just after this. It's one of my favorite Christmas lessons that I did some research about, how far it is to go from Bethlehem to Galilee, or is Galilee to Bethlehem? Bethlehem. It's 77 miles. How many of you have ever been pregnant? Yes, the mom said, yeah, that's right. Okay, imagine in your 9th month, walking / riding a donkey from here to almost Pueblo. That's tough. And the shame that it would have brought about of going to school. And so you're pregnant, really? Yes, the Lord brought this upon me. Really? His name is the Lord? No, I mean, the actual Lord. I'm really giving birth. Are you? To the reconciliation of all mankind. Really? How does that, there's so much that she would have gone through. She needed very much to find that strength, that trust in God. And so do we. There's a peace, there's a joy, there's a help in that trust of moving forward. And Mary says, and it's extraordinary, may it be as you said. How many men, great men, Moses being one, fought God on even a lesser thing? I want you to lead. I can't do it. Send somebody else. Gabriel, Gabriel. The other guy who was lapping water. Gideon. Thank you. Gideon. I'm the least of all. I can't be a leader. Over and over, people called to do great things of God, fought and wrestled with this trust thing. Mary is such a paragon and example of, I trust you, and I will do it. That's going to be important in our journey. So in that, and I think that's one of the most important Christmas messages that isn't often talked about, how important it is to trust the Emmanuel God that has come. So in that trust process, we're going to do a little exercise, kind of predicated by the video. We're going to break up by pairs, and we're going to share our story. And there's a couple of questions. Can you put them up there, Tyler? And break up with whomever you want. It can be someone new or not. But we're going to share for about 20 minutes, maybe even or so, just these questions with each other. The first, and this just is, I mentioned, that there's many kinds of forms of grief. What is the loss that weighs on you this holiday season? And it may be several. Again, there isn't a hierarchy. You don't have to come up with some dramatic story. Maybe there isn't one. I just came to learn and be more supportive. That's fine. What have you lost ever? And that may be the answer to that question. Number 2, share the details that most do not know around the day of the loss. What things do you remember? Smells, sights? What did people say? What was good? What was helpful? What was bad? It's amazing how, again, I shared the day that I heard about Steve's death. It's been almost 40 years, and I can go back almost minute to minute of when I first heard talking to the Jacksons that evening to what we had for dinner that night. There's a lot that is a part of your story. Share with the group, and by I say group, I just mean pairs, so this isn't a big thing, a fond memory of the person, time, or event that you lost. There is obviously what is one of your favorite memories about this person or time or event? Self-explanatory. I don't know why I'm repeating the same question. And then 4, is there a question never asked of you which you wished would have been? Is there something around the event or a hurt or a thing that you've never been asked, but you've thought about? Or even in just that, that's a good question. I had this, at Steve's funeral, this overwhelming sense of being overwhelmed. I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. And I don't think I was actually close to that. But I never said that to anybody. I wish someone would have said, in all of that time, no one ever asked, do you feel overwhelmed? And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that would have been a helpful question to me. Is how do you feel? Are you overwhelmed? How are you coping? What are you thinking that you're not processing? I did not process Steve's death very well, so I've learned a lot over the years from it. But that's an example of a question I wish would have been asked. Again, that's not blaming anybody. I'm not trying to say someone else messed up. I'm saying it did inform me that when I talk to people who are grieving, I don't ask anymore, how are you feeling? That's just up and down. I say, how are you coping? Do you feel overwhelmed? What does overwhelm look like for you? Thank you for sharing that. And I most times don't have answers. I'm not trying to say, okay, here's what you need to do. I'm saying, I'm with you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for trusting me with that. So that's a question for me. That's an example of what I mean by that. Does that make sense? Okay, so any questions? Insights? All right, let's break up. And by twos, and we'll spend just about 20 minutes or so. I think, are we in even numbers? If not, I'll take the odd person. I mean, the odd number person. I'll take the oddest one. That's right. Grab some place in the auditorium. And Tyler, this is where we'll play just a little background music. Thanks. Are we good? Okay, all right. Why don't we come together? Well done, good music there. And the spirit of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 there, the comfort that we have received, let's spend a little time sharing. One specific thing I'd love to hear is if there is a coping mechanism or a thing that has brought comfort to you, that may be an aid to somebody else, or just in the sharing and talking, what came up for you? And that is a deliberately open-ended question. But let's just spend a little time sharing. You can raise your hand. I'll call on you. You don't have to. This is no, I can go person by person. But so answer one of two questions. What came up for you as we were discussing, if anything, that was significant or maybe you are unaware of? Or in your grief journey or journeys, has there been something that has brought you peace that might be also a blessing for somebody else? I think I love the way you can reframe. Sometimes an obstacle is actually it's a blessing. There's an old proverb that's kind of like that. So we can look at things as, was that a loss? It was, but maybe it was actually something that took me in another direction of a greater blessing. I love the way you shared that. That's good. Boy, excellent. Satan is talking to you. Satan does not care and is like, oh, you're grieving, I'll give you some time. Not at all. He puts on even more the full court press. So to be able to differentiate what voice is his and what's right, or just to stop the voices sometimes, to say it out loud and to call it an excellent behavior. It's really good. And borrow. Please call someone. It's so interesting to me that, have you ever felt like, I don't want to call someone because I'll bring them down, or I don't want to confess because it'll upset them or in some way. I have never, ever experienced that on the other side. Anytime someone has shared something with me, I've never thought, oh no, that totally depressed me. Why did you tell me that? Have you? That's one of those lies from Satan that don't tell them because you'll bum them out, or you'll mess them up, or you'll make them mad. And the reverse is always true. I'm like, thank you for sharing that. Me too. That's helpful. So that openness, it's important, and it's one of Satan's strategies to isolate yourself. It's a gift you can give to someone to create a safe place, just to ask a question, and you don't have to have an answer. Just good. Now these are trademark questions. You can't use these after. No, just kidding. Absolutely, that's good. That is so good. I just heard this quote the other day that said, what people want the very most of anything is to be understood. It's true. I want to be understood. So what you shared there is really powerful. Let me also say that tears are a welcomed messenger. Tears just say, what I'm talking about is important. They're not that's why we cry when we're happy. We cry when we're surprised. The older I'm getting, the more I'm crying at commercials. I mean, just because what tears just say what we're talking about is important. So don't be ashamed or to cry. I think in any setting, you may be embarrassed by it or whatever. So breaking down in a restaurant's maybe not as helpful. But the point being, tears should not be ever a thing that you feel embarrassed about. They are important. And they say something that words aren't able to say. So they're always a welcome messenger. Okay, so the story behind the song, the guy who wrote it, his wife and daughter or daughters were in America. His whole family was in America. They were traveling back to Europe, and they were caught in a storm. The storm busted the boat, and all were drowned. And he lost his wife and his children in that storm. So he left America to travel back to Europe to, I think, whatever remains were left. He had to go to Europe and then travel back home across by boat. This is 1700s or whatever. On a trip to Europe, they crossed the same spot where the storm had been and where the boat had sank. And he felt this connection and this grief that this is where my wife and my children died, where I lost them. And that's what started the workings in his head. And on the way back, he wrote this song, "It is well with my soul. When peace like a river attendeth my way. When, I guess we could look at when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my, say it again? Whatever my lot, that has taught me to say, it is well with my soul." So that's the history of the song. So I thought it may be appropriate. So maybe we'll sing the song, and then. But I want to end with just a couple of tips. Again, being alone, don't isolate when you're in these times of grief. Sometimes being alone for a period of time is helpful. When my friend Steve died, I don't know why, but I found solace in watching baseball games. I would go to a Little League baseball game by myself, and there was just something I can't even describe it now. I found solace in it. It was helpful. So I was alone for those times. So there are times when you're alone, but there's alone time, recharging time, and there's I'm isolating. Don't isolate, but be sure that you're in some community. And I want to ask again that question. You should, if you can't now, should be able to answer it. Who's watching out for me? Who's looking over for you? Who's checking in on you? And if you don't have that person, ask. That is a wonderful gift for somebody to say, hey, can you, for a period of time, can you just check in with me? I need someone at church to give me a call at midweek, at Bible talk, at work, whatever, just to say, hey, how are you? Checking in with you. How are things going? Or that you can call. And so who's watching out for you? You should have that person. Consider that your grief can be an advantage in ministering to someone else. What you're going through it's a journey. It's a journey that someone else has gone before you, and that someone else is going to come behind you. There's things that you're learning. What are you learning? Use those and understand that you're being created, or you are creating a safe space and a camaraderie with someone else. And so your grief is I'm not going to say, God put you through it to teach you something. I'm saying use this opportunity to learn, because you're going to have opportunity to minister to somebody else. And you are learning some good stuff as you're going along. So understand that your grief is an opportunity to minister to others. That make sense? I do hope that our time and recognize that it is well with your soul. It's gonna work out. And it's dark and it's difficult, and there isn't a rule book, and there's not a clear path at times. It's disorienting, but you're not alone, and you're going to make it through. And I really appreciate your courage and your strength and what you mean even by being here and ministering to each other. So let's continue to pray for one another, and let's continue to talk. Look around. You guys are the first ever Blue Christmas that we've ever done. So maybe we should take a picture so that, 5 years when it's like 500 people go, the would-be 15. That's right. I remember when there were just 3 rows of us. Oh, now we're all veterans. But I do hope this becomes a ministry aspect for our fellowship, and you are on the ground floor. You're not just a part of it. You are our first Blue Christmas. So thank you for being here, and again, I hope it's been a blessing for us. Amen. We are dismissed.